Numbers chapter 20 again. We're finishing up this chapter. And as we begin, I'm brought to the recognition that, it's inevitable that at various junctures in our lives, we're all going to face crises. And sometimes we face them on a regular basis. And in fact, I would suggest that someone at this very moment is facing a crisis themselves in their life. And a crisis can be brief. It can last for a few days, a week, weeks, months, or even years. And of course, they come in different forms and fashions. You think about, economic crises. A good example of that's the Depression that this country experienced some 80 years ago. Natural disasters, international crises, medical, obviously personal and family ones. When you think about the word crisis, what comes to your mind? How would you define it? Emergency, a painfully distressing situation. It's emergency or sudden and generally unexpected occurrence or set of circumstances which demand immediate action. Now as we approach Numbers chapter 20 again, Moses as God's chosen leader, would we say that Moses had to deal with many crises as leader of Israel? Oh yeah, there's no joke about that. And of course in our text for today, he had to face two crises, and one which followed right after the other. And again, both in a sense were national crises, but yet one in particular was a personal one. And certainly one affected the religion that God had given Israel, the priesthood in particular. So for the next few minutes, let's look at Numbers 20, verses 14 through 29, and let's look at these crises, these two crises or crises faced by Moses and Israel, and how they were handled in particular by Moses and by God himself, in which can provide us with some insight as to how we can deal with the crises we face in our lives. And so we begin with verses 14 through 21. We have the first crisis. And here you have Edom's refusal to allow Israel to pass through their territory. Anyone want to read these 7 verses for us as we begin? Verses 14 through 21.
And Moses sent messengers from Kadesh unto the king of Edom. Thus saith thy brother Israel, thou knowest all the trouble that hath befallen us, and our fathers went down to Egypt, and we have dwelt in Egypt a long time. And the Egyptians vexed us and our fathers. And when we cried unto the Lord, he heard our voice, and sent an angel, and hath brought us forth out of Egypt. And behold, we are in Kadesh, a city in the uttermost of thy border. Let us pass, I pray thee, through thy country. We will not pass through the fields and through the vineyards, neither will we drink of the water of the wells. We will go by the king's highway, and we will not turn to the right hand nor to the left until we have passed thy borders. And Edom said unto him, Thou shalt not pass by me, lest I come out against thee with my sword. And the children of Israel said unto him, We will go by the highway, and if I drink, and my cattle drink of thy water, then I will pay for it. I will only, without doing anything else, go through on my feet. And he said, Thou shalt not go through. And Edom came out against him with much people and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through their border. Wherefore Israel turned away from him.
All right, thank you, Sister Dusty. All right, verses 14 through 17, we have Israel's request. And Edom was the country which lied around the south and the southeast portion of the Dead Sea. And the plan that Moses had in mind, the most direct route toward Canaan, was to lead Israel by the east route, of which the territory of Edom laid on. That was the most direct, the easiest of routes. And as we look at this verse, You look at the messengers that Moses sent, the message that they brought. And look at the phrase, thy brother Israel. And what do you know about Israel and Edom's relationship? Why is Edom referred to as Israel's brother?
Esau and Jacob.
There you go, Sister Nana. Esau and Jacob. And so they were kin. And it was from Esau and Jacob that these two nations arose. Remember the account of when Jacob wrestled with that angel? After that event there in the book of Genesis, what did God change Jacob's name to? Israel. And so we have that. Now, what was the relationship between Jacob and Esau like? Yeah, that's the best word to put it. And, they were antagonistic toward one another. And would we not say that the relationship between Israel and Edom would prove to be almost as identical as that of Jacob and Esau? It was. Antagonistic. And we're going to see how Edom reacts here. And in this text, you look, the identification of thy brother Israel is first given, and then Edom is reminded of Israel's past history. You would note on page 52, bottom of page 52 of our book, under the first main heading, and on to the top of page 53, the observation is made that over the past 500 years or so, the Edomite people had established themselves. They had become strong and relatively prosperous. Now Moses reminds Edom that Israel's history had been considerably different. Now how different had Israel's history been than Edom's? They had been enslaved. And so Israel was no stranger to trouble or travails. And Edom knew this, did they not? According to the text. And Israel, and Moses is reminding Edom of this, how their fathers went down into Egypt. Now, as you look at verses 15 and 16, here you have the historical facts. And again, you look at the tail end of the book of Genesis and the events that led to Jacob or Israel and his family winding up in Egypt. Now our book notes, again on page 53, that the ancestors of the Israelite people journeyed to Egypt at the invitation of Joseph. And because of the influence of Joseph, they were treated well. But again, in time, a new king arose who knew nothing of Joseph and cared for nothing for the people. And the people of Israel cried out to the God known to both Edomites and Israelites, and he had heard them in their afflictions. And as a result, we know the rest of the story. God raised Moses up to deliver them. And now, verse number 16 is interesting. We're told that God sent an angel and hath brought us forth out of Egypt. Now, anyone read what the book suggests on page 53? Did you read it, Dusty? What's your thoughts?
I think that the angel that went through was the death angel.
I'm thinking that, destroyer.
But I didn't ever think about it leading them out of there.
I'm pretty sure he didn't lead them out.
That was Moses' position, was to be the leader.
Mm-hmm.
That was the incentive.
But
Right.
the death angel allowed them. He delivered what it took to get them out.
I think it is, yeah. I think that's the sense in which it is used, that God sent that destroyer to get Egypt's attention. And in fact, Psalm 78:49, when we consider the destroyer, the identity of that destroyer as being the death angel, in that particular psalm, the psalmist said that God sent angels of destruction among the Egyptians. So you could make the case there that the destroyer was the angel of death. And it could be the case. And I would suggest that's a plausible explanation for that. Now, what they knew, though, the most important point in all of this is that it was by the power of God that Israel was where they were at the moment. Again, Kadesh, which was in the uttermost of Edomite territory. Now, verse 17. What did Israel want to do? What was the request? Pass through. And I think it's important to note here, Moses sent the message. What would Israel not do? What did they promise not to do? They promised not to bother anything. In fact, they said, we'll pass by on the king's highway, and we won't deviate off course. And that's the idea there of not turning to the right nor to the left. They would respect property and boundaries, and they would continue on that path until they passed through Edom's territory. This seems like a reasonable request, does it not? Was there anything outrageous in the request that Moses sent to the king of Edom? He wasn't asking for an army to protect them. He wasn't asking for food. All he was asking for was safe passageway, and we'll go the most direct route. Now, what did Edom say? Verse 18.
And then the Lord's army's going to be there if we try to come, not take the highway and come through there.
Yeah, they sort of strong arm Israel here. They sort of they take the bully tactic, do they not? Yeah. You come this way, you're going to get it. And this is an event that would ultimately lead to Edom's downfall. Their treatment of their brother Israel. And so here they say, you can't come this way. Now look at verse 19. They make the plea again. In fact, here it said that if we or our cattle drink any of your water, what would they do? They pay for it, reimburse them. And again, this is that's reasonable request and a promise that was made. And they promised, we're not going to do anything else other than travel on the main passageway, on the king's highway. That's all we want to do. We want to get through here as quick as possible. But again, you look at verses 20 and 21. Does Edom want anything to do with that? No. Again, verse 20, they say, you're not coming through. And so this time they did come out against Israel with much people and with a strong hand. Now, this would indeed be a crisis, would it not? When you're trying to get somewhere you want to go and you're trying to take the most direct route, and yet here you have this country, your kinsmen, and they're coming out against you with their armies. Now, how would we react? Now, what would be needed in this situation? And again, it would be easy to panic, would it not? When faced with a situation like this.
Well, we have to realize how many people we're talking about. It's not just like we take a few people.
Yeah, over 1 million.
We're talking about millions of people walking.
Exactly.
So this wouldn't be something that happened in a day's time.
Mm-mm. So this was a serious situation, and in this involved millions of people. So what is needed in a time like this, in a situation like this, when you're dealing with a mass of people, and you're dealing with a situation where this other nation's coming against you with their armies, what is most needed at this time? Prayer. And decisiveness. Obviously, faith as well. And so, as we think about this, what do they do? What happens here in verse 21? When Moses sees Edom coming out, what does he decide to do? What's the decision? Turn away from them. And again, that's the only sensible and reasonable decision to make. Any rash, it would be foolish to even attempt to try to go through there when they've already threatened you twice. And so, verse 21, they turn away. And they journeyed from Kadesh, verse 22, and they come to Mount Hor. And so instead of going the direct route, when you look at a map, when you look at the geography of things, Moses led the people southward. They turned southward toward Mount Hor and the Gulf of Aqaba. And this was to prevent conflict. And again, if there was conflict, what would have happened? What would have been lost? Lives would have been lost. And that would have been a needless situation. And so, to prevent this, they would take the long way around. And so in order to skirt Edomite territory, as our book notes, Israel had to travel some 75 to 100 miles southward. They had to go out of their way to avoid the Edomite territory. You ever been on the road and you've had to drive a long way out of the way because something came up on the way you wanted to go? It frustrates you, doesn't it? But again, you also recognize there are times, just didn't have a choice. We had to do this. And that's what happened here. Moses saw the situation. He recognized we're going to have to go the long way around. We don't have a choice in this unless we want to stay here and fight and cause a lot of needless destruction and casualties. We're going the long way around it. And so that's what they did. Mount Hor was located somewhere between the region of Kadesh and Ezion-Geber. And Israel came upon it as they traveled along the western portion of the Edomite territory. And it is here that we see the second significant event of this section, the second crisis they would have to face. And if someone would, let's read verses 23 through 29. And here we see Aaron's death, how they deal with Aaron's death. If someone would, read these.
The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in Mount Hor, by the water, the land of Egypt, saying, Aaron shall be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter with me, which I have given to the children of Israel. But because you rebelled against my word, and the water of Meribah, take Aaron and Eleazar, his son, and bring him up to Mount Hor, and strip Aaron his garments and put them on the wives of his son. For Aaron shall be gathered with his people and die there.
Go down through verse 29, Brother Carl.
So Moses did just as the Lord had commanded, as they went up to Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. Moses stripped Aaron his garments and put them on Eleazar, his son. When Aaron died there at the top of the mount, then Moses and Eleazar came down from the mount. Now, when all the congregation saw Aaron was dead, all the house of Israel mourned for Aaron for 30 days.
All right, thank you, Brother Carl. Here marks another transitional period in Israel's history. And here we face, it would be a national crisis in the sense that it would affect the priesthood. And certainly it would be a personal crisis for Moses because he would be losing his brother. And so as we look at this situation, how would Israel deal with the transitional period of the priesthood? Remember, Aaron served as what? As high priest. And how would Moses and Israel handle this transition? Well, text gives us the answer, and it spells it out. And it begins, God tells Moses and Aaron that, Aaron's going to die. And like Moses, he would not enter into the promised land. And remember what we studied last week, the reason they weren't entering was due to their sin against God. Remember, they failed to give him credit. They exalted themselves. Remember what they told Israel? Must we, ye rebels, must we fetch ye water out of this rock? They exalted themselves. And Moses did what to the rock when God told him to speak to it? Struck it twice. And as a result, God punished them by preventing them from entering the promised land. And so Aaron here was going to die on Mount Hor. And now the question might be, Israel hearing this, and perhaps Moses himself hearing this, might ask, what's going to happen to the priesthood? This would be a seemingly crisis point for Israel. But again, in crises, who has the answers? Who has the answer here in the solution? God. God has the answer to our problems. And so the question is, when we face difficult situations, and again, this is an obvious question, but again, it's a reminder for us all. When we are faced with crises in our lives, crisis, a singular, or crises, plural, who do we need to turn to?
God.
God, absolutely.
Because Moses don't think he created himself for this.
Yeah. So we turn to God. And so God has the answers. Look at verses 25 and following. And Moses is instructed, come with Aaron, bring him up into Mount Hor, but not just Aaron alone. You bring his son Eleazar. Now Aaron had a couple other sons too. Do you remember who they were? Yeah, you remember what happened to them? They were destroyed by God. But, Eleazar listened to God. So Eleazar was still around. And so Moses is told, bring them up into Mount Hor. And Eleazar there would be a witness to what was going to occur. And here we have the transition. God gives the instruction, verse 25. Verse 26, we have the transition in the priesthood. God tells Moses, strip Aaron of his garments. Now, which garments would he have in mind here? All of that, the high priesthood. Not Aaron's personal garments, but the priestly garments. So you take those off of Aaron, and then you put them upon Eleazar, his son. Now, this signifies what? Why would God tell Moses to put them on Eleazar?
Because he was Leon, and he would be the one to take over.
He would be the new high priest. And remember, the high priest served after the Aaronic order, direct descendants of Aaron. Here you have Eleazar, who was his son, natural successor to the high priest, office of high priest, was he not?
So Aaron just called over David again, or dies a natural death, or has it?
I've got some ideas on that here in just a moment, Ricky. We'll get, that's a good question. Verse 27, Moses did as the Lord commanded. Now, what does this indicate to us about Moses again at this juncture after his sins that we learned about, that we studied last week?
He was still under the God and listened.
Yeah.
And I always feel sorry for him because I don't think Moses intended to sin.
He let his anger get the best of him.
His anger, it was just out of frustration
Mm-hmm.
that he said he didn't go up there. I don't think he actually meant, watch me make water out of this rock. I think he knew it was God's power, not his, but in a moment of anger.
Yeah, that's what anger can do for us.
How many times have I seen other anger?
Yeah.
Many a times, I think we all have, and that's why the Bible says it's not sin to be angry, but we better watch our anger. Did Jesus get angry?
Yes. Sin not though.
Yeah, he sinned not. Yeah, and that's why the New Testament says, "Be ye angry and sin not," and that's the challenge for us And I think that's why we can all relate so well to Moses. Is that, he shows to us even the strongest of God's people can be overcome. And, even if he didn't intend to. Because you look back at those events and you look at, he listened to God there in the tabernacle because he did everything God told him prior to that. God told him to take the rod, and he did it.
He told him to strike the rock the first time.
Yeah, and he did that.
And
And
he struck it,
he told him to speak to it this time.
The people been riding pretty hard,
They were riding him pretty hard. But thankfully, though, we understand that Moses died in a right relationship with God. We know that. We talked about that last week because the end of Deuteronomy says that when you look, that no prophet arose in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face.
Moses just collectively having the same problem before with these people.
Mm-hmm.
Did it just without thinking.
And-
Anger makes us sometimes just not be able to think.
It does.
We need to cool down.
We do. And sometimes we say things in our anger that we would never say otherwise. I've been there and done that. Anger is a powerful...
But to explain,
What's that, Brother Carl?
Everybody.
Everybody. Anger is a funny thing, is it not?
he didn't listen. And it was reflected, and I agree with Dusty. He didn't mean to do it,
Yeah.
but
But he did it, unfortunately.
right. Listen.
Mm-hmm. But because here again, verse 27, another great compliment of Moses. He did as the Lord commanded, submitted himself fully to God's will. And however painful this was for Moses, and it had to be painful for Moses, did it not, to recognize his brother was about to die and that he had to remove the priestly clothing?
All the years they've been together.
All the years they've been together.
Serving the Lord, working with the people.
It had to be painful.
He lost his sister too.
She died.
Mm-hmm.
Miriam.
But he still did it. And I think that shows us the kind of faith that Moses possessed, does it not? That no matter that, even though this was a painful duty, he did it, and it had to have been painful for Aaron as well.
So like Abraham.
Right?
He just accepted it.
By faith, and so he obeyed God. Now look at verse 28. He does it, and we're told that Aaron died there in the top of the mount. Now, as Brother Ricky pointed out, what happened there? Well, it would appear that he did not die from physical decay. He was able to climb up that mountain. It takes quite a bit of physical. You got to be physically fit. You got to have strength to climb a mountain, do you not?
Most definitely.
So he was physically strong. And remember, by this time, he was well over 100 years old. Moses was too, and yet having to lead these people through the wilderness. And I think the best answer for what happened here is that God willed it. His death. And I think that makes sense, because you look at Moses' death later on when at the end of Deuteronomy, and we find that that in verse 7 of Deuteronomy 34, I think this is a good point to bring up here, that Moses died at 120 years old. And in regards to Moses, when he died, his eye was not dim,
It's all in it.
nor his natural force was abated. So what would that tell us?
Well, God had no hand in that.
Yeah, God had the hand in that, and I think God had a hand in this here as well.
Well, I had a question about before this, when he did the garments, did he take the garments off of Aaron at the foot of the mountain? I don't interpret it that way, the way the man in the book said.
I think they did it at the top of the mountain. Yeah, I think so too. I disagree with the book there.
And I'm worried about the little things like that this man says in this commentary thing that are just a little off.
Because verse 25,
You know what I mean? We're just commentators.
yeah, verse 25, verse 25 tells us, take Aaron and Eleazar and bring them up unto Mount Hor. Bring them up.
Well, there it says, and the people saw them go out, he took them out there and decided, in verse 27,
Mhm.
decided that they went up unto Mount Hor.
Yeah.
And decided.
So the people could watch them go up the mountain. And they could probably see, depending on the height of the mountain, they could probably see what was going on up there.
And I always wondered if maybe God buried him like he did Moses.
I think that's a plausible explanation. I think that's very plausible. Based on, you base that on what's found in Deuteronomy 34 with the action, with Moses' death.
That's one of the things we don't know about.
We don't know about, but that's a plausible explanation.
That's one thing I was wondering about, what happened to him, what happened.
God willed it. God told him he's going to die, and so, could he have lived longer? Could Moses have lived longer according to Deuteronomy 34:7? Absolutely, but God said, you're going to die, Moses. So God took it,
Otherwise, he would have been, he had to die because God had told him he couldn't.
enter the promised land.
So that's the natural way to go.
Yeah. God let him look over into the promised land.
Yes.
So,
We're able to see it.
exactly. So, I think God willed it.
Makes you wonder if poor Aaron got to see over there.
Probably not. I don't think Aaron did here. Obviously, where they're at right now, Mount Hor, and Moses died up in Mount Nebo, which, and it allowed him, its location, its close proximity to the land, allowed him to look over into it. And again, that was just the consequence of his sin. Now, and again, as we talked about last week, that does not mean he's not going to be in heaven, because, we looked at the other passages. And in fact, you could also add, who appeared with Christ on the Mount of Transfiguration? It was Moses who appeared as well there on the mount. So Moses died faithful. He repented. I think it's obvious here, as we've seen, and especially with verse number 27 here, when we're told Moses did as the Lord commanded.
Yeah, he's still serving the Lord right there.
Still serving the Lord. And next week, we're going to see him come to Israel's rescue yet again. Even though he's by himself leading this time, he comes to Israel's rescue yet again. However, verse 29, we're told that they mourned, Israel mourned, and I would suggest Moses mourned as well for Aaron for 30 days or for a month. And rightly so. And so as we think about this chapter, Moses and Israel handled their crises properly. Regarding Israel, they recognized that there was a problem, and they also recognized there was a solution. Had to take the long way around, but that was the solution to the problem, and Moses acted decisively. And regarding Aaron's death, simply they relied upon God. Moses didn't question God as to what was going to happen to the priesthood and the office of high priest. He simply trusted God, and as a result, he applied God's solution, that is, did as God said. That's what we need to do as well today, is it not? When faced with difficult situations, simply recognize God has the solution, His Word. As Christians, we need to recognize that we need to pray as well. Prayer helps a lot in difficult times. We need to make that decision to rely upon God and apply His solutions. And we must, above all things, walk by faith. Confident that when we are faced with these situations, we will be able to deal with them in a proper manner, because we'll be dealing with them as God has given us the answer to. And that's the main thing. God hath given unto us all things pertaining to life and godliness. So it necessarily holds that His Word provides us with the answers to all of life's problems. We just have to lean upon that Word.
That's who we always go to when we have difficulties in life today.
Or we should. Too many times we try to deal with our difficulties on our own, I'm afraid, Brother Carl.
That's the human side.
That's the human side of us.
We do that until it's a real critical situation.
Mm-hmm.
That's who I turn to.
Mm-hmm.
I got a good report.
There you go. And that's what we need to do. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much, as James worded it there in James 5:16. So we need to trust God, rely upon God, and pray to God, obviously. When we do all that, we will be walking by faith.
Carl's testifying faith right there by prayer,
Yeah.
Faith.
Exactly. And that's what Moses' actions here in this chapter shows us as well. The power of faith in God and the need to rely upon God in all things.